Rivera is set. And here's the payoff. Swung on and grounded to second. Cano fields, throws to first in time. Ball game over. World Series over. Yankees win. The Yankees win.
Monday. It is 7 o'clock, and that means it is time for the Split Decision here on Facebook Live. Good evening, everybody. My name is Andrew Newman. It is Monday, January. Jesus, I'm looking at the wrong thing here. It is Monday, the 4th day of May here in beautiful Poughkeepsie, New York. It is a little after 7 o'clock, and we definitely do apologize for starting a little bit late. I was having a problem with my scheduled stream. I think I'm learning that when I schedule the stream on my phone, it creates some problems versus when I do it on my actual laptop or on a desktop or something. So it was trying to get me to start a stream key that, needless to say, I did not have. So I was forced to say I did not. A little reverb there. Needless to say, I did not have. So I was forced to go back to the drawing board and start the stream over again. But we're here now. We've gotten that all squared away. Hopefully everybody who is able to join will do so in the coming minutes, and we'll go from there. It is a beautiful day here in Shelton, Connecticut. The sun is out at 7:15 at night. It is warm. It got to, the high 60s today. It's currently at 60 degrees or so, and another hour or so of daylight. We're officially into the month of May. We are into the last now 2 weeks of my 30s before 2 weeks from tonight, my 40th birthday spectacular. Although I do actually think I'm going to end up taking the day off of work. I wasn't planning on it, but we are going to be one of these days soon. I'm going to have to go pick up my marriage license from the city of Waterbury, Connecticut, and we have to do that during the work day, Monday through Friday. So what better day to do it maybe than to take off and do it on my my birthday 2 weeks from now. So I will keep you all apprised of that. As of now, the plan is to do the show either way that night, but certainly card subject to change on that one. I'll let everybody know. We have a lot to get into tonight. we're going to start with basketball, and we'll do basketball for as long as that takes us. Knowing that the game doesn't start till 8:00, which is realistically more like about 8:15. I'm planning on going, the better part of the 2 hours. I can start the game a little late. We'll see if that ends up happening or not. We'll kind of play that by ear. But for now, we will start here with the Knicks, with the NBA, and then we will get into other things as we see fit. Right at the top, though, I did want to mention, and I played the clip that was kind of fitting of the Yankees over the Phillies, the last out of the 2009 World Series, the last championship for the Yankees. The Yankees' longtime radio broadcaster John Sterling passed away today, I don't know if it was officially today or last night. The news broke, early this morning at like 8:00 or so, shortly after I got into work. And it was kind of, so Sterling started doing games in 1989 for the Yankees, and I think actually apparently missed a couple of games that year for a relative, might have even been like a sister's funeral or some kind of relative's funeral, and maybe one other thing. And then from sometime in his first season with the Yankees in 1989 until 2019, he did not miss a game. He did every single Yankee game, 162 regular season games, and God knows how many postseason games during that span. And then in 2019, I remember it was a big deal because I think he missed like 3 games for something. And his schedule started to be out more and more. And obviously 2020 was a weird year anyway, although I think he did most, if not all of those games. They just weren't allowed to travel. So I think they would call the games at Yankee Stadium, basically in a darkened stadium, even when the team was on the road. But, as the years went on, he started to miss more and more. He was still there most of the time. It just wasn't 100% of the time. And then weirdly, at like the beginning of the 2024 season, like a week or two into the season, he just abruptly retired. And, he'd been doing the games. Sorry, that snake's eye on my shirt is really catching me off guard. So I will once again point out I'm wearing a No Mercy for Fascism shirt, and the guy is strangling a snake, and the snake has the logo in his eye. But when you can only see the top of the snake, it looks like I'm wearing a shirt that's very different in terms of messaging. So maybe I'll just stand very naturally like this the whole time, or I could just stop wearing the shirt when I do the podcast, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Maybe I'll take a break after the first. Maybe I'll change shirts, maybe on camera if I really need the audience, but maybe I'll change shirts after the first break just so I don't have to continue staring at the eye of the snake. So that also sounds filthy. So really early in the 2024 season, he just abruptly announced he was retiring. And, he's 85 years old at that point. You kind of go, all right, maybe he got like a bad diagnosis or whatever. And then he came back from the playoffs. And I did feel bad at the time that the guy who he took over, who had taken over for him for most of the year, the Spanish language broadcaster, got kind of pushed aside for what ended up being a run to the World Series for the Yankees that they ultimately ended up losing to the Dodgers. And then he retired, permanently after that and didn't do any games last year. Dave Sims is now the full-time Yankees play-by-play man. So, when he passed away, I can't say it was shocking. I'm sure the Yankees knew he was in poor health, most likely. I mean, I guess something could have happened, but he was 87 years old. And he was certainly a polarizing broadcaster. I don't think he was a polarizing man, like human being. I don't think anybody had anything negative to say about him, but he was definitely a polarizing broadcaster. And we don't need to pretend that like, oh, you had to like John Sterling as an announcer, but he was certainly synonymous with the Yankees, especially at a time when the Yankees were such a staid, conservative franchise where, for generations, they had Bob Shepard as the PA announcer. And Bob Shepard was great, but Bob Shepard was certainly a type of, very stoic, reserved PA announcer. And every PA announcer since then has been in that mold. And John Sterling was a character. But he was such a unique character. And this is, I think, there are lots of guys who are quote unquote characters who broadcast baseball games on the radio, and they're just all homers. They're just all like, well, I'm the voice of the fans. I don't know what voice that was, but that, where they're all the same kind of guy. Nobody was like John Sterling. For better or worse, constantly quoting show tunes and, with references from the 40s and things like that. Like, definitely a unique figure. And then, known for it is high, it is far, it is gone, and ball game over, Yankees win, the Yankees win. And that's, still gets played in the stadium when the Yankees win. And, ideally they'll get one for him tonight and be able to play that. So I am sure when in memoriam time comes around this winter for the Hello Old Sports podcast, that my brother and I will do a segment on John Sterling. I'm sure we will have memories, but I feel like, and maybe this is a dying thing, but like, I have so many memories. Just forget about I'm not even talking about as a kid. I'm talking about as a teenager or in college or, home for the summer or whatever, of just like, whether I was driving to somewhere or from somewhere or, whatever. And it was John Sterling on the radio doing the Yankee game. And, maybe you're not living and dying with it because it's July 19th and it's just some random game against Detroit, but it's on, you're listening to it. And that was, when that's been the same guy for, the better part of 40 years, God, and he passes away. It's certainly, something you want to remark on. So I figured we would just touch on that on this, sort of somber day in New York baseball. The Yankees let's see if the Yankees have begun. And if they have begun, I know they were scheduled to start at 7:00, but it also wouldn't shock me if some tribute they had for Bob Shepard made it run long. The Yankees are currently in the bottom of the first. It is 0-0. I've recorded the beginning of the game so I can see whatever they have in mind for John Sterling tonight. They have a leadoff double to start things off, so maybe the Yankees continue to play the great baseball that they've been playing the last month or so, really since the season started, with maybe a 2-week exception there, and give the fan base a win tonight when they lost on a day they lost John Sterling. Let's turn our attention to basketball. Let's turn our attention to the Knicks. The Knicks, in a quick turnaround, the Knicks will begin round 2 of their playoff series in just an hour. They had game 6 on Thursday night. They just found out who they were going to play less than 48 hours ago. That game 7 hadn't even started 48 hours ago. And a quick turnaround. And, we will get into the opponent in a little while, but the Knicks will enter this series with some interesting momentum in a kind of way that I don't think anybody had anticipated, and nobody had anticipated, because if you made this prediction, you'd have sounded like a lunatic. So when last we left you, the Knicks had won game 4 on Saturday the 25th to tie the series. They had won game 1, leading most of the way, but it was a fairly close game. They ended up winning by 11. They lost game 2 and game 3 by 1 point each. In game 2, they blew a lead late. In game 3, they had a big comeback, but then let Atlanta go back in front of them. And for a couple of days there, the Knicks were down 2-1, facing a game 4 on the road that they really had to win. Had they lost that, although you never know with the other Eastern Conference playoff series, but had they lost that, the talk would really have started in earnest about, we were starting to reopen the book on what they did last year, and, Mike Brown's coaching and the decision to let Thibodeau go in the first place, and all of these things. And the Knicks had a convincing win, a 16-point win on Saturday, and they were actually up by, last Saturday, they were actually up by about 25, and then Atlanta scored most of the last points in the game. They came home for game 5 at Madison Square Garden last Tuesday night, or maybe it was last Tuesday night, and did really what you would want them to do. They jumped out to a 13-point lead at the end of the first quarter. They were up 16 at the end of the half. They were up 18 at the end of the third, and they ended up winning by maybe I'm not doing the math on that right. Let me see. They were up 13. They were up 16. They were up 18. Yeah, they ended up winning by 29 on the strength of also a big fourth quarter in that game. So a game that was never really in doubt. The Knicks got, a balanced effort, got a huge night from Jalen Brunson, 39 points and 8 assists. OG Anunoby had a double-double, 17 points, 10 rebounds. Karl-Anthony Towns continued to play very well with 16 points and 14 rebounds. They did not get much out of Mikal Bridges even in this game. Just 7 points on in 27 minutes on 3 of 6 shooting. A lot of guys played in this game because the Knicks were up so big late, and it was actually funny that Sohan, the guy they signed after he got waived by the Spurs earlier this year, who they brought in to maybe be in the rotation and didn't quite edge out enough guys to get into the rotation, came in and scored 10 points in 3 minutes and actually looked like he had a really good game, even though it was all in garbage time. But the Knicks won 126-97. They put the Hawks on the ropes after they put the Hawks back on the ropes after being down 2-1 in the series. They blew them out in game 4. They blew them out in game 5. The series shifted back to Atlanta for game 6. And look, I'm not going to say, I saw this coming, because again, if anybody said they saw this coming, they're lying. But you kind of felt like, as a Knicks fan, all right, yeah, they would have game 7 at home, and yeah, you would feel good even if they went to game 7. But from a momentum standpoint, and again, at this point, you're still thinking about it's going to be Boston. From a momentum standpoint, you're thinking if they can wrap this up in 6 and, end the series with 3 straight wins, blowouts in game 4 and game 5. Remember, this is before game 6 is even played. Blowouts in game 4 and game 5, won the series after being down 2-1. And, roll right into the next round of the playoff series with some momentum, as opposed to having to play a game 7 and then anything can happen. And then regardless, it's going to be a quick turnaround to the second round of the playoffs. You really want to see them go for the kill tonight. And also, successful teams don't often make habits of not closing series out when they have a chance to. So, all of this kind of swirling. The Knicks had won game 4 in Atlanta, so it wasn't like they were terrified to play in Atlanta. And what happened in this game was unlike anything I've ever seen. It was unlike anything really anybody's ever seen in an NBA game, especially a playoff game. This was a dismantling the likes of... and again, I don't think if they played 10 times, this would happen more than once. It was like the perfect storm. Now, if I'm a Hawks fan, am I doing a little questioning about the makeup and the character of the team? Yeah, you can't help but do that just because it's also the last game of the year. But, I'm inclined to say it's one of the more not fluky, but like anomaly things, which was the Hawks played about as poorly as you can play as a basketball team, and the Knicks played about as well as you can play at a basketball team in the first half. It was 5-0 Knicks, and then the Hawks scored 9 straight points. So 3 minutes into the game, it was 9-2 or 9-5 Hawks. The Knicks then, and it was 11-9 Hawks 4 minutes into the game. From 11-9 Hawks, it was then 32-13. So a 21-2 run for the Knicks, a 23-2 run, whatever. It was 40-14 at the end of the first quarter. In the second quarter, the Knicks, and again, remember, the Hawks were up 11-9. The Knicks by 3 minutes into the second quarter were up 34 points. They were up 50-16. And the game was basically over at that point. I said to Maureen, and the Hawks were making turnover. And again, the Knicks were playing excellent. Don't get me wrong. But the Hawks were having unforced errors. In addition to the fact they couldn't hit a shot, they were, just losing the ball on the dribble. They were throwing passes right to the Knicks. They were, making passes right into the lane that were resulting in fast break points the other way. And I said to Maureen, I said, an NBA game really can't be over 3 minutes into the second quarter just because of, how teams shoot and how much of the game is left. But this is as close to over in the second quarter of an NBA game as I've ever seen. It was 50-16. The Knicks were up 34 points. It really didn't get any closer than that. They crossed the 40-point barrier with 7 minutes and 12 seconds left in the second quarter. So by the time the Knicks got up to 62-19, they had been on a 43-8 run, if I'm doing the math correctly, or 43-7 run or something like that. They got up by more than 40. There was then a situation on a free throw where, and the Knicks, by the way, got up 72-22 with 4.5 left. So a 50-point lead, 17 minutes into the game. Then there was an interesting situation where they're waiting for free throws, and Dyson Daniels, they're kind of like hand fighting. And then Dyson Daniels hits Mitchell Robinson in the chest with an elbow, clearly intentional wind up elbow, because they're just standing at the free throw line. So there's no way to chalk that up to momentum or anything like that. It was very clear that he did it. And Robinson gets in his face and kind of wraps his arms around him. And then guys start trying to break it up. And I think at that point, Robinson would have gotten a technical and Daniels would have gotten ejected. Then since what they call it is like dissolving, when the fight had or the tension had kind of dissolved there, then Robinson went back after Daniels and the ref was knocked to the ground. I think Mike Brown was knocked to the ground. No punches were thrown. They looked at it. I thought they were going to give Robinson a double technical and give Daniels a flagrant 2 and eject him. And instead they just said they both got technicals and they were both ejected. So, Robinson did a good enough job to not, I'm not going to say he restrained himself, but he didn't throw a punch. He didn't do anything that could risk himself getting suspended. You never want to get thrown out in the first half of a playoff game, but if you're going to get thrown out in the first half of a playoff game, doing it in a playoff game where you're up by 50 points in the second quarter is not a bad one for that to happen. Also had and I'm not saying this was intentional, but had the added bonus for the Knicks of limiting Robinson's minutes in that game, where, every minute for Robinson is he's on a minutes count basically all year. He didn't play in any back-to-backs. The second round of the playoffs compared to the first round is going to be spaced pretty tightly. There's a game every other day now for the first 6 games. And then if there's a game 7, there'll be 2 days off between game 6 and game 7. So Robinson's going to have to, play on a tighter time frame, more games than he's used to lately. But, so the Knicks, they're up 83-36 at halftime. The starters play for a while longer. Then the backups come in. All told, the Knicks with a 140-89 win. They outscored the Hawks by 25 in the first quarter. They outscored the Hawks by 22 in the second quarter, outscored them by 6 for good measure in the third quarter, and then were outscored by 2 in the fourth quarter for a 140-89 win. The stats are hard to quantify because they all, none of them broke the 30-minute barrier, but OG Anunoby was phenomenal. He shot 11 of 14. He had 29 points, 4 of 6 threes. Bridges played well. He was 10 of 12 shooting with 24 points. Even Towns in 28 minutes, 12 points, 11 rebounds, 10 assists. So he had a triple-double in 28 minutes. And then, off the bench, Robinson just played 9 minutes. Diawara got a lot of time. Basically everybody on the Knicks played at least 7 minutes. Everybody on the Knicks scored at least 2 points. They made sure to get everybody some points. Just a thorough dismantling of the Hawks, really over games 4, 5, and 6, but certainly in game 6 to the point where, you feel a little bad. I don't have any real animosity. Certainly, I'm not going to be much of a fan of Dyson Daniels going forward. And, but the real public enemy on the Hawks these last bunch of years, as far as Knicks fans were concerned, was Trae Young, who's now with the Wizards. From the Hawks standpoint, they had a good end to their season. And, certainly taking the Knicks 6 games is probably about in line with what people would have expected. But you do have to think, hey, we were up 2-1, and then we got demolished 3 games in a row, including a, NBA historical all-time embarrassment in Game 6 at home. Like, I don't know that you can brush that off just that easily if you're the Hawks. From a more Knicks-centric standpoint, when they changed things up in Game 4, and I think they said this, at halftime or in the third quarter or whatever, when they talked to one of the Hawks assistants, and he had told, I forget who the sideline reporter was, but it basically told them that, we've been kind of stumbling since the Knicks changed things up in Game 4. They changed the defense around a little bit. They flowed more of the offense through Karl-Anthony Towns at the top. And that made a huge difference. And, again, I said this last week, I'll reiterate it again. If that's the Karl-Anthony Towns consistently, if the Knicks are going to get that level of play from Karl-Anthony Towns that they got in the Hawks series, you feel pretty good about saying they're going to be playing in June. Now, again, that's a bunch of caveats there, but, that was the level of play that is second superstar on a championship caliber team play from Karl-Anthony Towns. Now there's going to be a whole fresh set of obstacles or challenges in the next series with the matchups involved there, and we'll get to that in a couple of minutes. But, from a Knicks standpoint, they really did respond to adversity after losing those games 2 and 3. And, manage in the span of a week to just sort of put their foot down and, demolish the Hawks, have 3 pretty drama-free games in a row in games 4, 5, and 6. And, ironically enough, in a series that we were like, well, when the Knicks were down 2-1, it was like, well, now this is going to be a long series. At the very worst, it's going to be a long series, and they're not going to get, time between rounds, or at the very best, rather. And then it turns out they're the only one in the series who didn't play Game 7. So let's switch to the next series, and then we'll talk about the second round, and then we'll do the rest of the NBA. So the Knicks, when last we left you, the series that would determine who the Knicks or the Hawks would play, the Celtics and the Sixers, stood at 3 games for the Celtics, 1 game for the Sixers. The Celtics had won huge in Game 1 in Boston. Sixers came back and won by 14 in Game 2. Celtics won Game 3, 108-100 in Boston or in Philly, and then won Game 4, 128-96. And, when we were talking, all the focus was on if the Knicks can get by the Sixers, or if the Knicks can get by the Hawks and get to Boston. And, I think I might have said, hey, maybe Boston can elongate this for a game, or maybe Philly can elongate this for a game. But, I think we all were kind of thinking, all right, well, we've been prepared all year for if the Knicks win, they're going to have to get by the Celtics. So if they can get these, games against the Hawks, here we go. And instead, what we got was a 3-1 comeback from the 7-seed Sixers, who beat on Tuesday night of last week in Boston, beat the Celtics 113-97 with a dramatic comeback in the fourth quarter. The Celtics had a 8-point lead with 2:28 left in the third, up 3-1 in the series at home. The Sixers outscored the Celtics by 17 in the fourth quarter en route to a 16-point win. They won 113-97 behind 33 points from Joel Embiid, 16 from Paul George, 25 from Maxey. So they forced the series back to Philly for a Game 6. And I remember at the time saying to my friend, because that was the same night the Knicks won Game 5, saying, hey, bare minimum, Celtics got to play another game. And also, it might show with a situation to close out a series and you turn in that kind of a dog shit fourth quarter, maybe that shows some flaws with them as a team. And boy, was I right about that, just not in the way I thought. So game 6, you go back to Philly. A huge second and third quarters for the Sixers to build up a big lead. They were up by as many as, I think, 15. They end up winning 106-93, going away. A convincing, pretty much wire-to-wire lead or win, at least by the start of the second quarter. Jason Tatum also, seemed to have injured his other leg during this game. The Sixers once again got 30 points from Maxey. They got 19 and 10 from Embiid, 23 from Paul George. Just a really good performance from the Sixers, setting the stage for a game 7 in Boston on Saturday. By this point, the Knicks had won. And, I was saying to my friends, because now Tatum's, questionable and didn't end up playing in game 7. And I think, again, hindsight being what it is, I think the Celtics probably were foolish with Jason Tatum this year. The team was cruising along without him. They brought him back, and I know he wanted to play and he was cleared by the doctors, but would they have done any worse without Jason Tatum and giving Jason Tatum another, 6 months to gradually work his way back? And now he's dealing with another injury. Now it's not on the level of what happened to him last year, but, certainly a decision that was probably, I don't think anybody's going to look back on and think, yeah, it was good that we brought him back for this season. So what I had said to friends going into the game between the Celtics and the Sixers game 7, as I said, honestly, if the difference in opponents didn't also impact whether they had home court advantage or not, you could talk me into rooting for the Celtics to win tonight. But when you factor everything in, I still think it's better for them if Philly wins. And the Sixers jumped out to a big lead at the end of the first quarter, 32-19. Celtics cut it to, I think, 5 at halftime. Sixers got up big in the fourth quarter. They were up by about 15. And then the Celtics did manage to close the gap all the way down to, I think, as little as a 1-point game. Yeah, 99-98 with 2:25 left. But then the Sixers managed to win it 109-100. I'm not going to go play-by-play on this just because, there's so much else to talk about. The Sixers win it 109-100. They come back from down 3-1. They end the Celtics season on their own home court. They beat the Celtics 3 times in Boston in this series. And, really, this is, again, I'm not inclined to look at things from their point of view or feel any general sympathy, and they did win a championship 2 years ago. That's 2 playoff exits that are tough to deal with in a row. Last year with a team you dominated all year and you blow the big leads in games 1 and 2, you blow another decent lead in game 4, you get your butts kicked in game 6, and you get eliminated by the Knicks in the second round. Then this year in a 2-7 matchup against another, divisional rival, and I know divisional rival doesn't mean as much in basketball as it does in, other sports, but it's the Sixers and the Celtics is a long-standing rivalry. They've been good at the same time a lot more than the Knicks and the Sixers have. And they have this great year that nobody was expecting, and Tatum comes back, and Jaylen Brown was, played at an MVP level for most of the season, and they're clicking, and I think everybody considers them the favorites in the East. They're the 2 seed, and they blow out the Sixers twice in the first 4 games. They're up 3-1, and they blow the series, and the season is over, by the first or second day of May. And I think, again, you could, if this had been a year where Tatum had been hurt the whole year, and I'm sure that the positive spin to it is, look at what they did this year in a year they were supposed to stink, and they got Tatum back, and it just didn't click, and they got upset. But you're allowed to it. You don't have to just now revert to what the preseason expectations were. For the Sixers, I think we're seeing what the Sixers can do when all of those guys are healthy and playing together. I mean, Embiid in this series was tremendous. In the last game, he had 34 points in 39 minutes, along with 12 rebounds and even 6 assists. Maxey chipped in 30 points. Paul George, 13. 13 points in 42 minutes is no great shakes, really, but we'll add him in there. Edgecombe with 23. They are a team with some stars that are very, very good. And, you probably have to go back to when they were the 8th seed and beat the Bulls in the first round of the playoffs for the last, most impressive Sixers series win. It's possible I'm missing one in there, but that's the one that immediately springs to mind. So, the Knicks now get the Sixers. They're going to have home court advantage. There's already been a lot made of the fact that, they're going to probably have a good amount of fans in Philadelphia over the weekend, especially because the games are Friday and Sunday. And look, the one knock on that is accurate from 2 years ago is Knicks fans. Oh, there's always a ton of Knicks fans in Philadelphia because Madison Square Garden has priced regular people out of the arena. And there's something to say for that. That is a legitimate point that, it's cheaper for fans to drive, forget about even the fans who live equidistant in New Jersey or whatever. If you live where I live, it's still probably cheaper in general to go see the Knicks play the Sixers in Philly than it is to go to Madison Square Garden. The one thing I'll say, and maybe it's just as the years have gone on, and, obviously I know some people from Philadelphia, and it would have been the same way with Boston too, but I'm really not interested in this beyond it being a basketball series. I'm really not interested in debating the relative merits of the city of New York versus the city of Philadelphia, or, which fan base is, more diehard, or, it's basketball. Some of that is probably that I'm not 24 anymore, but it's a game of, the one thing I will say, because I can't resist, I heard somebody wrote an article today kind of complaining about all the celebrity Knicks fans and in Philly we're more blah, 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 blah. It's you can't go 5 goddamn seconds on a Sunday in the fall without seeing Bradley Cooper in a NFL commercial with his Eagles shit on. So let's relax a little bit. You don't think I've had it to hear with the Kelseys? You know what I mean? Enough with the well, we're just a downtrodden blue collar. It's basketball. It's just the Knicks against the Sixers. Everybody relax. So here's the thing with the Knicks for this series. I have not spoken to one person who doesn't think this is going to be a tough series. I think Knicks fans, it's not an arrogance. If you're a Knicks fan and you're glad they're playing the Sixers instead of the Celtics, it's because of home court. And I think that's legitimate. That's not an arrogance to think that it's better to play the team you're going to have home court against than the team you're not going to have home court against. The Knicks lost 2 games to the Sixers this year. They won 2. They lost the first 2. They won the second 2. The first 2 were very early. The Knicks actually haven't played the Sixers in quite a while. I don't know if they played them after the All-Star break. So, recent history probably doesn't mean that much. The key to the series, I feel on both ends, is Joel Embiid, the guarding of Joel Embiid, the health of Joel Embiid, all of these things. You can't say, if Joel Embiid, and he tweaked himself at the end of game 1 or at the end of game 7 against the Celtics, and he joked saying he was faking it. I don't think he was faking it, but it doesn't seem like it's serious, is what I'll say with that. I don't want to hear it if he gets hurt, because he's always hurt. That's part of the deal with him at this point. So, if he turns around and it's well, yeah, but Embiid missed 3 games. It's yeah, but that was always a distinct possibility. I think the key for the Knicks is going to be, and it's not about shutting anybody down, because you're not going to shut Joel Embiid down. You're not going to shut Maxey down. I don't think the Sixers are going to have much luck shutting Jalen Brunson or Karl Anthony Towns down. These guys are really good players. The thing to be concerned about with the Knicks, because this is his problem all year, and he's playing really, really well. You don't want to see this happen. Is that in the first 3.5 minutes of the game, Karl-Anthony Towns gets called for 2 fouls against Joel Embiid, and he's got to come out. And then Robinson comes in, and then Robinson's got 2 fouls against Embiid. And suddenly you're either playing one of them with their hands tied behind their back, or they're both out of the game, and suddenly you're giving Ariel Hukporti big minutes in the second round of the playoffs. The Knicks have to avoid that. They cannot be getting their big guys in immediate foul trouble because of Embiid. He's going to get his buckets. He's going to, they're going to run the offense through him. The Knicks need to be smarter than that. And that is one area where I think I'm going to give the edge to the makeup of this team this year versus the makeup of this team last year. Is I think Mike Brown is going to take more care with his matchups than Tom Thibodeau did. So again, the proof is in the pudding, and no matter how good your matchups are, Karl-Anthony Towns might be, he's prone to getting fouls. So I'm looking at this ESPN article, and it said, plenty of reasons. Fair to wonder if the 76ers can stay healthy, given all the injury concerns about both Embiid and Paul George. If the series goes at least 6 games, which feels likely, Philadelphia will play 11 games in 21 days. Playing 6 guys heavy minutes could cause some wear and tear. When Maxey and Embiid are healthy, it's devastating pick and roll combination that few, if any, teams can stop. VJ Edgecombe has not looked remotely afraid. Scouts' take on the most important matchup. I'm fascinated to see if Embiid and Cat guard each other. Teams tend to cross-match those shooting big matchups, but they might be able to guard each other. I really was impressed with how Towns guarded in the second half of the Hawks series. That was as good as I've ever seen him at that end, but New York is going to have its hands full guarding Maxey. I guess you'll try Anunoby on him, Bridges, McBride, Hart. Those are good defenders. You can throw a few different guys at them. Again, it's not about shutting guys down. When you play the Bills in football, you're not expecting Josh Allen to complete 5 passes for 68 yards. You're expecting him to get his yardage. What you don't want is for him to have 470 yards and 3 touchdowns. Like, that's kind of the way I look at it. And obviously with the added bonus of not fouling your own offensive weapons out. The thing I'll say, which is the same thing I said 2 years ago, they want to call Joel Embiid, and Jaylen Brown for the first time in his life made points that I am in agreement with. I don't know what to think about you. Brown was on, and in all seriousness, it's an incredibly bad look to be whining about Joel Embiid flopping after, what just happened in that series. You get eliminated 3-1, after being up 3-1. Like, it's not the time or place for it. The thing I'll say, and I said 2 years ago, if they're going to call people for being physical with Embiid, that's fine, as long as they call people for being physical with Brunson. You call it on both ends. You send both guys to the line. I got no problems. I also do think, as I just said, the Knicks got to make sure not to foul a lot, whatever. I do think they need to knock him around a little bit. Now, not dirty like he was 2 years ago when he hurt Mitchell Robinson on purpose, but, a little physical. If you're going to foul him, foul him. And again, that's not saying cut his knees, but like, it's bad enough if you're going to pick up a bunch of fouls. It's even worse if you're going to pick up a bunch of fouls 16 feet from the basket, because you touched him on the arm as he was gathering for a shot. So it's going to be a tremendous series, I feel like. By the time we're here next week, so Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Sunday, we will be through 4 games. It is extremely unlikely this series will be over by this time next Monday. I think we can all admit that. We will have time to regroup at where we are in this series. Somebody's going to be up 3-1, or it's going to be 2-2, or the series is going to be over. And if it's a sweep, then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But I don't see that scenario playing out. So, we're probably about 20 minutes from game 1 kicking off. I'm not overconfident. I feel good about the Knicks' chances, but also if I was a Sixers fan right now, I would feel good about the Sixers' chances. I think both teams are playing the last 3 games. I think both teams are playing their best basketball that they have all season. So things can change rapidly, as we saw. The Knicks went from on death's door and a disaster and what a calamitous season to 6 days later, they were winning by 60 points and on their way to the second round of the playoffs. So with that, we'll take our first break. We kind of went a little long on this one, but we'll come back and we'll go a little longer after this. I'm gonna try and see if there's anything I can play here to take us out. Let me see. Let's play a little bit here, and then we will. I don't want to play the whole thing. All right, let's take a break, and we'll be right back on the split decision.
Mud that's painted green. Of course, from up there's a lot of slipping and falling as the players try to adjust their body weight to keep their balance. Some did, some didn't. Another thing they have to really deal with today is nervous energy playing in a playoff game. We talked to Eagles safety Brian Dawkins yesterday. He said you get so much nervous energy before a playoff game that you don't get butterflies in your stomach, you get birds in your stomach. Back up to you, Pat.
All right, DJ, unusually balmy day for this time of year in this part of the country, and even more importantly, there is no wind. Very little to speak of.
You know, and I'll tell you, when you get to this thing where the winner is going on to the championship game and losing that, it doesn't make any difference what the heck kind of field it's on.
That is very true.
I think these two teams, I really do, I think they could go out and play in the parking lot.
The Eagles kick off. They have an outstanding record when they lose the toss, which they did because they're kicking off. This is Ron Dixon with some room, and Dixon can fly away from Akers, and he's gone. He's not going to be stopped by anybody. What a way to open up a playoff game. The Giants, Ron Dixon from 97 yards. Nobody came close. What an alley he had.
Ron Dixon, the fastest Giant of them all. If you want to get the ball in someone's hand that can take it all the way, it's Ron Dixon.
97 yards.
If he just catches it inside the 5-yard line, starts up the middle, picks up a couple of good blocks there. There's no way Akers is going to tackle him. And at this point on, that's just Ron Dixon and his speed to the end zone. What a way to start a playoff game.
I can't believe they freeze-dried M&M's.
We're right here, you animals. M&M's popped.
Can our Nissan Pathfinder do this?
The new V6-powered Nissan.
Myers deals, swung on and driven to deep left. It is high, it is far, and it's gone. Yankees win. Yankees win. Bernie Williams homers deep in the left field seats to lead off the 11th inning on a 1-1 pitch. And the Yankees beat the Orioles 5-4 to win Game 1 of the American League Championship Series. Burn, baby, burn. He's done it again.
All right, we are back here live on the Split Decision. It is just about a minute before 8 o'clock here in lovely Shelton, Connecticut. We are rapidly approaching the Knicks and the Philadelphia 76ers live from Madison Square Garden, the world's most famous arena, in Game 1. The game probably will start closer to 8:15. So we'll keep an eye on that. Later tonight, you got the start of the second round in the Western Conference with the Timberwolves and the Spurs. But before we do that, let's go to the rest of the game, the rest of the Eastern Conference. Again, both of those went to Game 7s, which were yesterday. Both Game 7s were fairly anticlimactic. We'll go in kind of chronological order. So you had the Pistons and the Magic, who, when last we spoke, the Magic were up 2-1 on the Pistons, and then won Game 4 to go up 3-1. And when you're up 3, even in an 8-1 series, if you're up 3-1, you really got to like your chances. And, you know, the Detroit, obviously, this would have been, there's been some 8-1 upsets, but this would have been like a really sort of, Orlando was not considered a very live 8 seed. So to lose to this team, you know, if the Sixers had been the 8 seed and played Detroit, I would not have been surprised if the Sixers had won the series. I would have been very surprised if Orlando won the series. I was surprised that it was 3-1. The Pistons mostly took care of business in the in Game 5 back in Detroit. I think they got up 12 early. I guess the lead was as little as what? Let's see. They were up 12, and they were up 6. They were up 2. No, that doesn't make any sense. Okay. They were up 12 at the end of the first quarter. They're up 6 at halftime. They're up 10 going into the fourth quarter. They end up winning by 7. It did get to 112-109 with not much time left, but then Orlando couldn't capitalize. They had to foul. Detroit had some free throws. They win Game 5. We go to Game 6 Friday night, and this was, I mean, bizarre. Detroit was up by a point at the end of the first quarter. Orlando outscored Detroit by 23 points in the second quarter to take a big lead going into the third quarter. Orlando was up 60-38 going into the third quarter, up 2-0 or up 3-2 in the series. And, you know, as close to pulling off a 8-1 upset as you're realistically going to get. They got it to 62-38. They scored the first basket of the second half, and the Magic were up 62-38, a 24-point lead. Detroit got it to, and I'm still going. Detroit got it to a 10-point game, 64-54. Then Orlando hit back-to-back threes and was back up 70-54 with 4:14 left in the third quarter. So, you know, they had been up by 22. It got to 10, but then they were back up 16. They were actually up 17 with 3:54 left. So 71-54 with just under 16 minutes left in the game. And Detroit finishes the half from 71-54. They finished the third quarter on an 8-0 run. So now it's a 9-point game going into the fourth quarter. But it's still a 9-point lead for Orlando. Certainly Detroit can come back from down 9. It's 71-62 Orlando. Detroit scores. I'm trying to count how many. Orlando got 1 free throw in this stretch while Detroit got to 80. So that was a, 17 or 18-1 run at that point, whatever you want to say. It was 80-72. Orlando got it as close as 80-75, but that was it. Detroit ends up winning going away 90-73. So from down 22, they end up winning by 14. In the fourth quarter, they outscored Orlando 31-8. In the third quarter, they outscored them 24-11. The Magic did not score 20 points in the second half of Game 6. And Detroit gets the win. They force the Game 7 at home. And you kind of, at that feeling, at least if you're me, kind of saw it as a foregone conclusion. Like, okay, after that, Detroit or Orlando is not going back to Detroit and winning a Game 7. Now, to their credit, they were up by 2 at the end of the first quarter. By the time it was halftime, they were down by 11. Never really got closer than that. Detroit ends up winning in a blowout, 116-94. So Detroit, who lost 3 of the first 4 games, seemed like they were on death's door in Game 6, comes back and wins. You can certainly cast some doubt on being down 3-1 in the first place to Detroit or to Orlando, needing 7 games, needing that comeback in Game 6. But, all of that becomes a moot point as the Pistons win their first playoff series in what has to be 2 decades. Because I know last year when they lost to the Knicks was their first playoff appearance in decades. Cade Cunningham in the Game 7 had 32 points and 12 rebounds. So Detroit, they're the top seed. They're a team that's got a good, the Knicks, who are the next closest seed left in the Eastern Conference, Detroit beat the crap out of them 4 times. Detroit is not a team to take lightly in the Eastern Conference, but, a shaky series against Orlando, but you got to give them credit. They, to be down 3-1 and then to be down like that in Game 6 and to come back and win shows toughness. I mean, what the Knicks did against the Celtics last year was somewhat similar, in my opinion, to what happened in Game 6 in this Orlando game, and for Detroit. So, now if they turn around and drop the first 2 games to Cleveland, then you got, then it's a fresh worry because Cleveland's a lot better than Orlando is. But give credit to Detroit for the win. Cleveland also won a Game 7. This series was a lot more up and down. The home team won every game in this series. Cleveland won games 1 and 2, fairly big. They got blown out by Toronto in Game 3, 126-104. Last Sunday, so 8 days ago now, they win they lose 93-89. So they go back. It's 2-2. They go back home for Game 5. They actually are trailing most of Game 5. They're down by 8 points late in the third quarter, and they have a strong fourth quarter that ends up with them winning 125-120 at home. Series goes back up to Toronto and I feel bad that this shot's going to get kind of lost because it was one of the craziest shots you'll ever see. The teams are going back and forth up in Toronto. Obviously, Cleveland trying to close the series out. Toronto trying to force a Game 7. And RJ Barrett, former Knick, Toronto native, has been up there for a couple of years since the Anunoby trade. With the Raptors down by, what were they down, 2? What am I looking at here? Oh, that was in overtime. Okay, never mind. So in overtime, I'm trying to make sure I'm getting this correct. In overtime. Yeah, with it 110-109, Barrett shoots with a second on the clock, 1.2. The ball hits off the rim, goes straight up into the air, and there's going to be no time on the clock. If this doesn't go in, season's over. Toronto loses. Cleveland moves on, and it drops in for a 112-110 Toronto win. Technically, there was a second left, and Cleveland tried to do something, but couldn't get the shot to drop. So they win the game in overtime, goes to Game 7, and then yesterday was a little bit closer. It was tied at halftime, and then the Raptors were destroyed in the third quarter. Cleveland outscored them by 19. They end up winning 114-112 after about the halfway point of the third quarter. This one was a foregone conclusion. So Cleveland wins the series. They win all 4 games at home. They lose all 3 games on the road. So we now have a Cleveland-Detroit matchup in the one Eastern Division or Eastern Conference semifinals, sort of the two more Midwestern teams playing each other. And then you have the Knicks and the, or I guess Rust Belt more, like Midwest. I don't know. I feel like if you're still in the Eastern time zone, it's not really Midwest. And then you have the Knicks and the Sixers in the kind of Northeast Metro Corridor matchup. So, obviously that series will get going in Detroit tomorrow night at 7:00. They'll play every other day as well. First two games in Detroit. Then the series shifts to Cleveland for Saturday and Monday. So when we were on the air next, they'll have only played 3 games in that series. Game 4 will be getting just underway right around this time. I don't have any way to call this. I think this, of the 4 of these, the 2 Western Conference series have definitive favorites. I don't think anybody can deny that. So the Eastern Conference ones are the ones where you kind of go, well, I could see it either way. Obviously I was rooting yesterday for Toronto and Orlando because I kind of wanted the thing of like, well, if the Knicks can get by the Sixers, if they have to play in Eastern Conference Finals against one of those 2 teams. And then it was like, all right, worry about that later. Neither of those games went the way I wanted to, but like now I'm like, that series can just be what it is, and I'll have enough to worry about with the Knicks and the Sixers. And if the Knicks start looking like they're going to advance or do advance, then I'll start to worry more about who they would potentially play. But it feels like tempting fate to be that worried about that right now. But from just a basketball standpoint, you would expect it to be a good series. In the Western Conference, we'll start with the series that tips off tonight, which is the Timberwolves and the Spurs. I think when we were on the air last, if they hadn't clinched already, they were about to clinch, and when we were on the air last, the Spurs were up 3-1. They then beat the crap out of Portland in Game 5 and won the series 114-95. So they have been off since this past Tuesday. So this is their first game in 6 days tonight at home. I was reading all the weird stuff about the Trailblazers owner, that he's like, making them check out of hotels like at checkout time and then kill time the rest of the day before games, and that he's just like really starting to pinch pennies and stuff like that. And it's surprising because he's also the owner of the Carolina Hurricanes, who were like a really good franchise and certainly look like a potential favorite to win the Stanley Cup this year. So, it's certainly a little bit surprising, but it'll be interesting to see what happens with him owning that team, because that team's been there a long time. They're the only major Big 4 pro sports team in that area, but it's like, it's not a guarantee. Like, you hear rumblings of like, will they be there forever? Who knows? It would be really a shame if the NBA got Seattle back and lost Portland. Like, that's a great rivalry that has not existed for almost 20 years now because the Sonics moved. If suddenly they have the Sonics and lose Portland, that would really suck. But anyway, the Spurs opponents will be the Minnesota Timberwolves, who won the 3-6 matchup against Denver. Denver also, you'll remember, fired their coach last year, Mike Malone, and this year are bounced in the first round of the playoffs by a Minnesota team in the 3-6 matchup. This series, they only played 1 game in this series since the last time we were on the air. Or no, hang on, I'm off. The last time we were on the air, Minnesota was up 3-1. They went to Denver. Denver won 125-113 last Monday to prolong the series. And then Game 6 back in Minnesota over the weekend, or I think it was Thursday night. The T-Wolves won 110-98 on the back of 32 points from McDaniels. I don't even think Edwards played in this game. No, he did not play in this game. It sounds like they're hoping to have him back for tonight, but really a big performance from Minnesota in a closeout game without their best player to try and wrap it up at home, and they do. Randall, 18 points in 37 minutes as well for the Timberwolves. So Timberwolves Spurs coming up, Game 1 of that series this evening. It's pretty unanimous that everybody is picking picking San Antonio to win the series. Not that that's the be all and end all, but that is where most of the predictions seem to lie. And then the final series, we have the Oklahoma City Thunder, who may have even swept since the last time we were on the air. They may have even swept before we were on the air last. They swept them a week ago. Game 4 was a week ago tonight. They swept Phoenix in 4. A couple of them were blowouts. A couple of them were a little closer, but none of them were very close. So the Thunder won and have now had a week off, and they awaited the winner of the Lakers-Rockets series. Now, the Lakers had been up 3-0 in this series. They then lost Game 4 a week ago, 115-96 in LA. They went back to in Houston. They came back to LA and lost 99-93 in Game 5. And once you've lost half of it, if you're up 3-0 and now you're only up 3-2, it's in your mind. Like, especially if Game 6 is on the road. And hard to imagine a Lakers team with LeBron James, even over 40 years old. Hard to imagine LeBron James being the first one to blow a 3-0 lead in the NBA in an NBA playoff series. But, here we are going into Game 6 in Houston, and they've lost 2 games in a row, and they get a big game, 27-3 run at one point in this game, 28 points from LeBron, and the Lakers close out the Rockets 98-78. The Rockets once again dismissed early from the playoffs. The Lakers on to the second round for what has to be the first time in a while. So, pretty much all of the predictions as you look at this round have been fairly unanimous. And I'm going to try to see, I think the East, let me see if it gives us who picked what. So Thunder, Lakers, it says, will Luka return in time for this series? Seems like that's still very much up in the air. All 12 experts picked the Thunder over the Lakers, according to ESPN. I don't have this one doesn't have in each game, like game in 6 and 7 and 5. So then with the Timberwolves and the Spurs was also a clean sweep of 12 picks to nothing for the Spurs winning the series. So unanimously, the ESPN experts think we're going to get Thunder Spurs in the Eastern Conference Finals and Western Conference Finals. And you have to admit that would be a pretty damn good series. In the East, in the Detroit Cleveland series, the ESPN experts, there's only 10 of them for this, 7 Pistons, 3 Cavaliers. And so I'm guessing a couple of guys who did the Western Conference are calling this series. And then the Knicks Sixers series was 7-4 in terms of expert predictions. So far more ambiguity, shall we say, about who's going to win the Eastern Conference series as opposed to who's going to win the Western Conference series. And I have to admit, I think that's fair. Both of them at the moment locked in a fierce 2-2 tie 2 minutes into the game. So we'll skip that for now, and I'll catch up later. A touch on the hockey, and then we'll take a break, and then maybe we'll get into basketball, and then we'll wrap things up a little bit, or baseball rather, and then we'll wrap things up a little bit. So we have the first series is underway already. The Hurricanes and the Flyers, who the Flyers, I mentioned how the Lakers lost the 2 games after being up 3-0, and you get to the point where you really have to start thinking about it. The Flyers were kind of in that position. The Flyers had beaten Pittsburgh the first 3 games. They then lost to Pittsburgh in Game 4. They lost to Pittsburgh in Game 5. They came home for Game 6, and that game went into overtime at 0-0. So had Pittsburgh won that game, they'd be going back to Western Pennsylvania for Game 7. The Penguins will have won 3 games in a row, and you don't like the Flyers' chances in that situation. But instead, they get the goal in overtime. The Flyers continue their torrid run that ended in the regular season. They beat the Penguins. They beat their arch rivals in the playoffs. And I didn't realize the Penguins, I guess, have not won a playoff round since like 2018. Like, I knew they had fallen on harder times, but like, I didn't realize it was just that wild. So hockey did what basketball usually did, and with all the game does, and with all the game sevens, basketball didn't do it this year, which was that they started the second round of the playoffs before the first round was fully over. So we had the Flyers and the Hurricanes. The Hurricanes swept the Senators and were just resting up and getting ready. And game one was pretty dominant. The Hurricanes were up 3-0 early in the second period. They coasted to a 3-0 lead. Game two of that series is currently in the middle of the second period in Raleigh. The Flyers actually jumped out to an early 2-0 lead. They are still holding on to a 2-1 lead over the heavily favored Hurricanes in the Eastern Conference semifinals. The other Eastern Conference series was just decided last night. That series actually won't get going until Wednesday. And that is the Montreal Canadiens and the Buffalo Sabres. The Sabres had been up. So the Sabres were up 3-1 on Boston. They had a bad game one, but then they had like first 2.5 periods of game one, they were terrible. Then they scored like 3 goals right in a row to take a 3-2 lead. They end up winning 4-3. They lost game two. They went to Boston, and God, pretty rough times at the Fleet Center there this past 2 weeks. The Bruins and Celtics each lost 3 games in that building in the playoffs in the last 2 weeks. The Sabres went to Boston. They won 3-1. They won 6-1. The Bruins managed to keep the series alive in game 5, 2-1. And then the Sabres beat up on them pretty good in Boston Friday night to win a playoff round. They go to the Eastern Conference semis against Montreal, who played a 7-game series against Tampa Bay. Played a 7-game series. Maureen wants me to call the Fleet Center by the correct name, so I will. I believe they've probably put up the Spirit Halloween signs because it's closed for the season now. Anyway, she's gonna be coming in here in a minute. But the Canadians get by the Lightning. This series also rotated wins and losses. The Lightning won game 1. Excuse me, the Canadians won games 1, 3, 5, and 7. The first 3 games of the series all went to overtime. Game 6 went to overtime, and games 4, 5, and 7 were all 1-goal games. So they were all 1-goal games in this series, but Montreal wins. So Montreal and Buffalo in one series, Philadelphia against the Hurricanes in the other series, and between the Canadians, the Sabres, and the Flyers, you got a real chance at a team who's had a significant playoff drought or significant championship drought getting out of the Eastern Conference. Now, of course, you've got the Hurricanes, who are probably the favorites, who have been there a lot more recently, have won it more recently, but there's that. And then in the Western Conference, you've got the starting tonight, or actually starting last night, you had the Wild against the Avalanche, and this was some game. And this game was played almost entirely while I was asleep. But the Avalanche win this game 9-6. It was 3-2 at the end of the first period, Avalanche. It was 5-5 at the end of the second period. And then the Avalanche outscored the Wild 4-1 in the third period and won this game 9-6 in game 1. I don't know if it's like how they say in baseball where like the ball flies farther in the thin air in Denver. Maybe that's what happened. It was thin ice and the puck flew farther. So that was the one series. And then the last series that will get going, I guess it's not the last series, but the last series for us to mention that will get going later tonight, Anaheim against Vegas. Vegas played a great series against Utah. They won in 6 games, but Utah was a very game team. Utah was actually up 2-1 in the series. And then game 3 was a 5-4 overtime game. Game 4 was. Game 5 was a 5-4 double overtime win. And then game 6, Vegas finished them off 5-1. So those are your Western Conference finals, your Western Conference semifinals, your Eastern Conference semis. We talked about Flyers and Hurricanes about halfway through the second period right now in game 2. And that game is still 2-1. let's take a break. We'll come back. We'll do a little bit of baseball. We're not going to go all the way till 9 unless we get a call or something like that. But I have a feeling most of my loyal audience is either watching the Knicks or watching the Flyers, depending on who they are. So I'm understanding of why there's not as much traffic tonight. But we'll take a break. We'll come back. We'll do a little bit more. And most of the reason we're doing a little bit more, by the way, is just I need to let a little bit of the basketball game play so I can catch up on DVR a little more calm emotionally. That's kind of what I've determined works best for me at this point. You're listening to The Split Decision.
With SafeLight, you can get that fixed now and pay later.
Fix now, pay later?
SafeLight offers flexible payment options and anywhere mobile service, so you can get it fixed here, or here.
All right, back here live on the Split Decision Facebook Live, or excuse me, YouTube here on this May the 4th, 2026. It is chock full of playoff games right now. The Knicks and the Sixers in the very early going in the first quarter. The hockey, all of it. Kentucky Derby was this past weekend in a pretty crazy race. There was a comeback at the end from a horse coming from the back of the field to win it. You also had a horse throw its rider and fall on the ground before the race. And I mean, sometimes you'll see horses kind of freak out before a race, but usually they don't like fall down like that. And the rider was lucky that he wasn't A, seriously hurt, and that B, the horse didn't roll over on him. So, they made the wise decision to scratch the horse. And, you kind of feel bad anytime you see something like that, because a lot of times a horse does something like that and breaks their leg and gets euthanized because they can't recover if they break their leg or whatever. I'm not a horse doctor, believe it or not, but I know that part of it. So they were able to just scratch the horse and it's fine. And I guess was on its way home later today or whatever. So the Preakness will be in 2 weeks. It will remain to be seen. I haven't looked if the horse who won the Derby is even going to race in the Preakness. And I would think if that happens again, it's going to be the death knell. They're going to have to do something with these races being so tight together. It's not 100 years ago anymore. You're going to have to, if it's bad enough that none of the horses that don't win the Kentucky Derby run the Preakness. If now the horses that win the Kentucky Derby don't even bother, well, then it's not really a Triple Crown race. And they're going to have to get together with Pimlico and with Belmont and say, do you insist that this race is on the third weekend in May, or do you want it to be the second leg of the Triple Crown? Because it's not going to be both. And then the same thing with Belmont. Do you want this to be whenever it is the third week in June or the second week in June, or do you want it to be the third leg of the Triple Crown? Because it's not going to be both. You're going to have to come up with something at some point. So anyway, with that, speaking of Pimlico and Belmont, Baltimore and New York, let's talk about the Yankees, who are currently winning 3-0 in the middle of the fifth inning against the Orioles. They just got out of a first and second nobody out situation by getting a double play and then a fly out. So Schlittler is once again pitching very well. Going into the middle of the fifth, they got another home run in this game from Aaron Judge in the first inning, 2-run home run, and then a sac fly from Cody Bellinger to make it 3-0. The Yankees are currently, playing unbelievable baseball. I don't think that's saying anything out of school necessarily. They are 23-11, which is good for the second best record in baseball, only behind I think it was the second best record in baseball. Check. The second best record in baseball, only behind Atlanta, who is 23-11. Excuse me, Atlanta's 25-10. I just reread the Yankees. Record. So the Yankees are 23-11. They have, they're getting amazing starting pitching every week. It's been a while since we talked about them, but basically since they fell to 10-9 on April 7th, they lost to the Angels on April 16th to get to 10-9. Since then, they are, what would that be? 13-2. Yeah, they lost the last game of the series to Houston and the last game of the series to Texas. They played Kansas City and swept them 3. They went up to Fenway and swept them 3. Then they went down to Houston. They won 2 out of 3. They went to Texas to the Rangers and won 2 out of 3. And so that was a 7-2 road trip for them. And now they've come home for Baltimore, and it's a wraparound series, rare. And Friday they won 7-2 behind a good pitching performance from Adam Warren. Saturday they won 9-4 behind a good pitching performance from Weathers. Yesterday they won 11-3. I don't believe Fried got the win yesterday just because of it was actually still 3-3 when he came out of the game, and then the Yankees exploded. They got a run in the 6th, and then they got 7 runs in the 8th inning and ended up winning 11-3. And now tonight it's Schlittler with a 3-0 lead going into the bottom of the 5th inning. So at least 5 innings of shutout ball for him. Yankees will stay at home after this for Texas for 3. Right now, it's a couple of guys who've gone down. Luis Gil, who, was the rookie of the year in 2024 and missed a lot of time. I'm trying to pull up just his game logs this year. Missed a lot of time last year. This year appeared in 4 games, was not very good in any of them. On April 10th, he pitched 4 innings, 3 hits, 3 runs. On April 15th, 5 innings, 5 hits, 4 runs. Up in Boston on the 21st, he was good, 6 1/3, 2 hits. And then against Houston, 4 hits, 4 innings, 5 hits, 6 runs. So for the year so far, in 19 innings, he'd allowed 15 hits and 13 runs to a 6.05 ERA. So they sent him down to the minors. Elmer Rodriguez made a start, and he's scheduled to make another start. I believe as early as tomorrow, he's scheduled to make another start. Yeah, they have him listed for May the 5th, which is tomorrow. Garrett Cole and Carlos Rodon are getting very close. They've each made a couple more. Garrett Cole next rehab start set for Tuesday, which would be tomorrow. Cole so far completed 3 minor league starts, 1 with Hudson Valley and 2 with Somerset, recorded 5.02 ERA, blah, 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 blah. The veteran righty worked 5 2/3 of a frame and threw 60 pitches while sitting at 93 to 96 miles per hour. The Yankees haven't announced Cole how many more rehab starts Cole will make, but it seems like a possibility that this outing Tuesday goes well. Cole's following start will be in an MLB contest. So if Cole pitches Tuesday, tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, that would set him up to start Thursday. If they decide to wait one more turn through the rotation, that would set him up to start Sunday. If he pitches Tuesday, that would set him up to start Sunday in Milwaukee. If they decide to wait one more turn through the rotation, that would set him up for that weekend series against the Mets at Citi Field. So he's getting very, very close, barring any kind of setback. He could start by the time we're on the air next week, or he could be, a few days away from that. Rodon, I think, is right around the same place. Rodon's next rehab start could be his last. So the Yankees could be about to add to a starting rotation with Fried and Schlittler. And who else do they have to put in there? Fried, Schlittler, and probably Warren. Weathers would probably be the odd man out in that situation, but they could probably use him out of the bullpen. So, it's a good problem to have. We know guys are going to go on the DL at some point. We know the Yankees are going to need more than 5 starters the rest of the way. But, the fact that they're getting this quality of pitching already with what they're about to get back is a huge deal. The other interesting story for the Yankees was Volpe's rehab days were up. So they had to decide whether he was going to come up or, he was no longer going to be on a rehab assignment. And with how well Caballero's playing, they made the decision to send Volpe down. So he's not on an injury, a rehab assignment anymore. He's just straight out been sent down. Now, you would imagine that's not going to be for very long. I think the Yankees look at Jose Caballero and they say he's playing really, really well right now. And I think they don't expect this to last a whole lot longer, but it seems like, and give the Yankees credit for not just immediately going, no, we're sliding Volpe back in there. Because if you slide Volpe back in there and he struggles, it's going to turn into a whole thing. So I think the Yankees are hoping, not that they're hoping Caballero cools down, but they're hoping the decision is easier in a week or 2 or 3 or whatever it is, probably 2. But just an interesting thing for a franchise that's been very, very loyal to Volpe and really willing to give him a lot of time and energy and, not try to be critical of him in the papers or, whatever, to kind of now be like, well, yeah, we're still going to stick with what's working for us right now. And, I think that's reasonable. The Yankees are winning every single day, but still a little bit surprising. Let's just look at the standings real quick and then we will wrap things up. So right now we mentioned the Yankees at 23-11. Tampa Bay also having a very good season, 21-12, just a couple games behind them. The Blue Jays 2 games under, 16-18. Baltimore 15-19, and then Boston 13-21, the second worst record in the American League and only a half game from the worst record. The AL Central is pretty crazy with how mediocre / tight everything is. Detroit 18-17, Cleveland 18-17, Chicago, the White Sox 16-18, Kansas City 15-19, Minnesota 15-20. So every team within 3 games of each other, because first place is only a game over 500. And then out west, you've got, as everyone predicted, the Sacramento Athletics 18-16 and currently in first place. Texas 16-18, Seattle 16-19, Houston 14-21, and the Angels 13-22. In the NL, you got, we talked about Atlanta 25-10. Already a 9-game or an 8-game lead on Miami, Washington, Philadelphia 14-20. They've fired their manager. The Mets 13-22. They have said their manager is safe for now, which generally means he's not safe. You don't usually hear them say the manager is safe for now, and then it just works out and he never gets fired. The Cubs 22-12, one of the best records in baseball. A surprising. Every team in the NL Central's got a winning record. St. Louis, who was supposed to be horrible, is 20-14. Cincinnati is 20-14. Milwaukee 18-15. Pittsburgh 19-16. And then out west, the Dodgers, where you'd expect them to be at 21-13. But San Diego right there, right behind them. Colorado 16-17. The Rockies at 14-22, which is no great shakes, but like, for them, that's just run-of-the-mill bad. That's not, considering they were supposed to be one of the worst teams of all time. And they also lost 5 games in a row. Up until a few days ago, they were like just under 500. So, again, it's still way too early. Most teams have played, just over 30 games. Let's pull up in June when we're at, a month from now when we're at about 60 games. And then we can start looking and, unless your teams are playing in the NBA or Stanley Cup Finals, you'll be out of stuff to look at otherwise, and you can really start to hone in on the baseball. And that's kind of where I've landed on this. The Yankees are playing great, so there's less to talk about. And also there's so much other stuff to talk about that's on a tighter time frame that it just makes more sense to talk about that stuff. So what I think we'll do now is we will wrap it up for the night. I know a lot of people are otherwise occupied with different sporting events. The Knick game is nearing the end of the first quarter. The Flyers and the Hurricanes are nearing the end of the second period. The Flyers still holding on to that 2-1 lead, just under 2 minutes to go in the second period. When we are next on the air, we will have 4 games of Knicks Sixers played. We will very likely still be in the thick of this series, and we'll be looking at a stretch run of the last couple of games of the series. We could, it's very possible that I guess it's not very possible, but it's possible, the Spurs and the Thunder could be cruising towards a Western Conference Finals playoff matchup, which would be really intriguing given how well the Spurs played the Thunder this year. Or maybe the Lakers or the Timberwolves could surprise us and be hanging on. And then there's the Cavaliers and the Pistons. And the second round is kind of cool because you get really good series, but there's there's only 4 of them in each playoff, so you can kind of follow along. By the time you get to the conference finals, there's never more than 1 game on a night. There's some nights where there's no game on in the respective sports. And then when you get to the finals, it's like very spaced out. So, we got a few more weeks of the chaos. In the next couple of weeks, we're also expecting the NFL schedule to come out and mini camps and stuff like that. So certainly that's all worth keeping an eye on. And then, like I said, we'll be on the air next week. We'll be leading off with the Knicks and the Sixers in some form or fashion. But in the meantime, we will wrap things up for the night. I want to thank everybody who listens later or, whatever, listen to piece of it. I know it's a busy time of year with sports and with everything else. So we will sign off. I ordered
Italian, Thai, Spanish food, but the star of the show was definitely this beef.
All I will say is take care, everybody. Stay safe. Have a happy Mother's Day. Sunday, don't forget. We will see you 1 week from today at 7 p.m. May the 4th or May the 11th on Facebook Live. I don't know. I'm kind of scared. We will see you 1 week from now, Monday, May the 11th, 7 o'clock. Streaming. Let's go Knicks. Stay safe. See you next time.